"Put your hands where I can see them," a woman suddenly screamed into her phone. The quiet suburban street had been peaceful just seconds before. Birds chirped softly. Cars were parked neatly along the sidewalk. But now, tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to explode. Marcus Hill stood beside a small gray router box near the front porch of his house, holding a screwdriver and a laptop. He looked confused, glancing around the yard as if trying to understand what was happening. Across the street, a woman stood on her lawn, phone pressed tightly to her ear. "Yes, officer, there's a suspicious man messing with internet equipment at my neighbor's house," she said loudly. Marcus sighed quietly and shook his head. Before the story continues, let me say something from the heart. If stories like this move you, if you believe truth and kindness deserve to be heard, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps these powerful stories reach more people who need to hear them. Marcus returned his attention to the router box, carefully adjusting a cable. The woman across the street, whose name was Karen Whitfield, kept talking to the dispatcher. "Yes, he's still there. He's opening the box now," she reported urgently. Marcus finally looked toward her and called out calmly, "Ma'am, I live here. I'm just fixing my Wi-Fi." Karen lowered the phone slightly and stared at him with narrowed eyes. "Oh, really?" she replied sharply. "Yes," Marcus said, holding up his laptop. "My connection dropped during an online meeting, so I'm resetting the router." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Well, the police are already on their way," she said coldly. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, clearly exhausted by the situation. "Of course they are," he muttered quietly. A few minutes passed in heavy silence. Marcus sat on the porch steps waiting calmly while Karen continued watching him like a guard dog. Soon, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. 2 police cars pulled onto the street and stopped in front of the house. Officers stepped out carefully. "Sir, can you stand up and step away from the equipment?" one officer asked. Marcus slowly stood and raised his hand slightly. "No problem, officer," he said calmly. Karen hurried across the street, pointing dramatically. "That's him! I told you he was tampering with the internet box," she declared loudly. One officer turned to Marcus. "Do you live here, sir?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, officer. My name is Marcus Hill. This is my home." The officers exchanged a quick glance. "Do you have ID?" the officer asked. Marcus reached slowly into his pocket and handed over his driver's license. Karen crossed her arms proudly. "See, I was protecting the neighborhood," she muttered. The officer studied the ID for a moment. Then he looked up at the house number and back at Marcus. "Mr. Hill, is this 214 Maple Street?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. The officer nodded slowly. Another officer approached the router box and looked inside. "Looks like normal router maintenance," he said quietly. Karen frowned. "Well, he could still be hacking the network," she insisted. Marcus rubbed his forehead. "Officer, I work in cybersecurity. My internet went down during an online meeting, so I reset the system." The officer's expressions changed slightly. "Cybersecurity?" one officer asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, I run a security consulting company from home." Karen scoffed loudly. "Yeah, right." At that moment, something unexpected happened. The second officer looked more closely at Marcus. His eyes widened slightly. "Wait a second. Are you Marcus Hill from Sentinel Network Security?" he asked. Marcus blinked. "Yes, that's my company," he replied cautiously. The officer suddenly straightened his posture. "Sir, you helped our department last year during the ransomware attack on the city servers," he said. Marcus smiled politely. "That was my team, yes." The first officer was shocked. "You're the guy who recovered the police department's data?" he asked. Marcus nodded again. Karen's confident expression began to fade. The officer turned toward her slowly. Ma'am, this man literally helped save our entire department from a cyber attack. Karen's face turned pale. I didn't know, she stammered. Marcus remained quiet, watching the scene calmly. The officer handed Marcus his ID back with respect. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Marcus nodded politely. No problem, officer. You were just doing your job. Karen suddenly looked very uncomfortable. But he was messing with the equipment, she tried weakly. The officer looked directly at her. Ma'am, people are allowed to fix their own Wi-Fi in their own homes. A heavy silence fell over the street. Marcus finally spoke again. You know, this isn't the first time something like this has happened, he said quietly. Karen avoided eye contact. I was just being careful, she muttered, embarrassed. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand being careful, he replied. Then he looked directly at her. But assuming the worst about someone, that hurts more than you might realize. Karen's shoulders dropped. For the first time, her confidence completely disappeared. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Marcus studied her face for a moment. Then he gave a small, tired smile. I hope next time you ask a question before calling the police, he said softly. The officers nodded in agreement. That would save everyone a lot of trouble, one added. A few neighbors had stepped outside during the commotion. They whispered quietly among themselves, clearly realizing what had just happened. Marcus returned to the router box and finished reconnecting the cable. His laptop beeped. Connection restored, he said quietly. The officers chuckled. Looks like the neighborhood Wi-Fi hero saved the day again, one joked. Marcus laughed softly. Just doing my job, he replied. Karen stood silently for a moment. Then she slowly walked back across the street, clearly reflecting on everything that had happened. Before getting back into their cars, one officer turned to Marcus. Sir, the city still appreciates what you did for us. Marcus nodded humbly. I'm glad I could help. The police cars drove away. The street slowly returned to its peaceful quiet. Marcus sat on the porch for a moment, looking at the sky. Sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with computers or technology. Sometimes they were fought with patience, dignity, and quiet strength. And on that quiet afternoon, one simple truth became clear to everyone watching. Never judge someone by assumptions, because the person you doubt today might be the very person who saved you yesterday.